Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive with us. This one's all about fashion trends, looking ahead to 2025. We got some really interesting sources this time around. Yeah, we've got like an academic paper, that kind of takes a broad view of the forces shaping the industry. We've also got some blogs that are kind of zeroing in on things like technology and Gen Z's influence. Oh, and we've even got like a trend forecast report. And it's pretty interesting. I think you're going to find it thought-provoking. So you guys ready to kind of figure out like what you might be wearing in 2025 and how tech and sustainability and Gen Z's values are all going to shake things up?
It's really fascinating how all of these sources, even though they're coming from like such different perspectives, they all kind of paint a pretty clear picture of what's coming in the future. It's like they each hold a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
And as we put them together, you'll kind of get this bigger picture, like this fashion puzzle.
Okay, so let's dive right in. This academic paper, Explore Global Fashion Trends. It kicks things off by highlighting some of the major themes we're seeing. So that's like sustainable fashion, the comeback of these retro styles, the growing influence of technology, and the rise of all these regional styles. So that all sounds pretty familiar, right? But here's where it gets interesting. They talk about how fashion is kind of cyclical. Like, remember shoulder pads and high waist, they're back. But obviously they have that modern twist that just screams 2025.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, fashion's like a language. It borrows from the past and it kind of remixes it. It creates something new. Like, think about wide leg jeans from the 70s. I mean, they've been reinterpreted so many times over the years. And this time around, they might be made from recycled materials. Or maybe they'll even have technology woven into the fabric.
Whoa, okay. Tech woven into the fabric. That's
Yeah.
like next level. And speaking of tech, this blog, Future of AI in Fashion, it just completely blew my mind. They're talking about AI creating personalized style recommendations, which I kind of get.
Yeah.
But then they go on about AI actually designing clothes. Like, could an algorithm really come up with something as iconic as, say, a little black dress?
I mean, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Is AI going to just be a tool for designers? Or will it become like this creative force on its own? I mean, it's already being used for things like trend forecasting and personalized recommendations. But, the idea of AI actually designing clothes from scratch, well, that raises all these questions about creativity and originality and, what does it even mean to be a designer?
Yeah, I mean, fashion is all about expressing yourself right.
Yeah.
So where does AI even fit into all that? I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But one thing that's clearly not going away is this focus on sustainability. I mean, the academic paper, both of the blogs, even the trend forecast report, they all agree that sustainable fashion isn't just a trend, it's essential.
It really
Okay.
is. And it's not even just about using eco-friendly materials anymore. It's about rethinking like the whole fashion system, from how things are produced all the way to how we consume them. This blog, The State of Fashion, talks about the rise of dupes, those knockoffs of designer items, and how it reflects this growing awareness of the environmental and ethical costs of fast fashion.
Right, so people are starting to question like where their clothes are coming from
Yeah.
and how they're being made. But let's be real for a sec. Sustainable fashion can get really expensive. Can these brands really convince people to shell out, a premium for ethical and eco-friendly clothing,
Yeah.
especially when there are so many cheaper options out there?
That's the challenge, isn't it? But I think it goes back to value.
Really?
If brands can really show that sustainable fashion is also higher quality
Mm.
and, it lasts longer and it's ultimately a better investment, I think consumers might be more willing to pay a bit more.
That makes sense. Like
Yeah.
investing in one well-made piece that you'll wear for years and years
Yeah.
instead of buying, a ton of cheap clothes that'll just fall apart after you wash them a couple times. But you know what I'm really curious about in all of this? Gen Z. This blog, Gen Z Fashion, 14 fashion trends, really dives into their style. And it's clear that they're not afraid to experiment. Like we're seeing streetwear, Y2K, gender fluid fashion, cottage core. It's like they're pulling inspiration from everywhere.
I know. What's interesting about them is that they're not just following trends, they're actually creating them.
Mm.
And their values like authenticity and sustainability and inclusivity, they're all reflected in their style choices, and brands are having to listen or they'll get left behind. It's a huge shift.
Okay, but hold on for a sec. This report, Gen Z Stats and Trends, kind of paints a slightly different picture. They say Gen Z is super pragmatic, especially when it comes to money. I mean, they grew up during recession, so they're definitely careful about what they spend, but they're also willing to invest in things they believe in. So how do brands balance those two things? Like, how do they appeal to their values and their wallets at the same time?
That's where it gets tricky. It's not just about price anymore. It's about offering an experience. It's about telling a story. Luxury brands, as an example, they've always excelled at creating these aspirational worlds that go beyond just the product itself.
So you're saying it's not just about buying a Gucci bag, it's about buying into like the whole Gucci lifestyle. Okay, I guess that makes sense for those high-end brands. But how do everyday brands connect with Gen Z on that level?
It's about authenticity and transparency. Gen Z can smell a fake a mile away. They want brands to be real, to stand for something, and to engage with them on their terms. And social media plays a massive role in that.
Right. It's all about those Instagrammable moments
Oh,
and those, viral TikTok trends. But we can't forget about the other side of the age spectrum here, right? What about the silver generation?
Yeah.
That's those over 50. The state of fashion report mentions them briefly. But I'm kind of curious to know more about how brands are, catering to that growing demographic.
It's a great point. I mean, fashion's not just for young people anymore, and brands are starting to realize that. But the challenge is appealing to, a wider range of ages.
Hmm.
Without, alienating their core audience, it takes a really nuanced approach. Like, you have to understand the specific needs and desires of each generation.
Okay, so we've got Gen Z driving these trends. The silver generation is emerging as this powerful force, and this constant pressure to be sustainable and innovative. Whoa, it's a lot to keep up with. I'm already feeling overwhelmed. And we haven't even talked about how all of this is going to play out on a global scale.
Don't worry, we'll get there. But before we dive into the global landscape of fashion, let's, take a closer look at Gen Z's impact. I mean, they are the ones shaping the future after all. All right, so let's unpack Gen Z's influence a little bit more. We were just talking about how they're really shaping trends with their values and how much they're willing to spend right. Well, this Gen Z Stats and Trends report actually calls them pragmatic idealists, which I think is a pretty good way to describe this generation. They're really aware of all these, big global issues like climate change and social justice. But at the same time, they're also dealing with things like student debt and a tough job market.
So it sounds like they're not just like blindly following trends. They're thinking about the impact of their choices. I mean, that's pretty impressive. But how does all that translate into their fashion sense? I mean, this Gen Z fashion blog describes their style. It's like a mix of everything. Streetwear, Y2K, gender fluid fashion, even cottagecore. It's like they're pulling from every decade and every subculture all at once.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what makes them so interesting. They're not afraid to experiment, to mix and match, to really create their own unique style. Remember that whole paradox we talked about earlier? They're trend focused, but also individualistic. It's like they're saying, hey, I'm going to wear what I want, how I want, and it's going to reflect me.
I love that. It's like they're taking back fashion and making it their own.
Yeah.
But how are brands keeping up with this constant evolution? Fashion moves so fast these days. What's hot one minute is out the next.
It's a huge challenge for sure. Brands are having to become much more agile, like way more responsive to what's happening on the streets and online. Remember those localized go-to-market models we mentioned before? That's becoming really important.
You know what? I still don't really get what that means. Can you explain it a little bit more?
Sure. So basically, it means that brands are moving away from this one-size-fits-all approach. Instead of creating like the same collection for everyone, they're tailoring their designs and their marketing to specific regions and demographics. They're paying attention to local trends, cultural nuances, even the climate.
So instead of trying to like dictate what's cool, they're actually listening to what people want.
Yeah.
That seems like a pretty smart move, especially with a generation as diverse and opinionated as Gen Z.
Exactly. And it's not just about listening either. It's about actually engaging. Brands are collaborating with influencers, tapping into online communities, even co-creating designs with their customers. It's a much more interactive and participatory approach.
Okay, that makes sense. But let's go back to this whole sustainability thing for a minute. I mean, it's clearly a top priority for Gen Z, but it's also a massive challenge for the fashion industry as a whole.
Yeah.
How are brands balancing the demand for sustainable fashion with the need to actually stay profitable?
Yeah, it's a real tightrope walk. And to be honest, not everyone's doing it well. But
Mhm.
there are definitely brands out there who are genuinely committed to sustainability.
Hmm.
They're using recycled materials, they're reducing waste, they're investing in ethical production practices, and they're being transparent about it all, which is really important.
So it's not just about doing the right thing. It's also about letting people know you're doing the right thing.
Exactly. Consumers, and especially Gen Z, they want to know where their clothes come from, who made them, and what impact their purchase is having on the planet. They're looking for brands that align with their values.
One of the sources, that Future of AI and Fashion blog, it talks about how technology can actually help with sustainability. Like they mention AI-powered design tools that can optimize fabric use and reduce waste.
Yeah, that's a really exciting area. Imagine being able to design clothes virtually, so you're eliminating the need for physical samples
Hmm.
and reducing the environmental impact of all that prototyping. AI could also be used to help with things like recycling and upcycling, or
Right.
identifying new ways to give old clothes a second life.
Whoa. That would be amazing. I mean, I love giving my old clothes a second life,
Mm.
but it's hard to know what to do with them sometimes.
Yeah.
It would be so cool if there was an app that could tell you how to recycle or upcycle your clothes.
Well, there are already apps that can do that. You can find places to donate or sell your old clothes, or even get tips on how to mend or repurpose them. Technology is making it easier than ever to be a conscious consumer.
That's so cool. Okay, so we've talked about how Gen Z is shaping trends, how brands are adapting, and how technology is playing a role. But I'm still curious about the bigger picture. What about cultural influences? How are all these different regions and cultures influencing fashion trends in 2025?
That's a great question. It's something that the academic paper actually touched on. They talked about this rise in regional influences, how designers are drawing inspiration from all these different parts of the world. Think about the global popularity of K-pop fashion, for example. That's having a massive impact on streetwear and youth culture all over the world.
Oh, yeah, I've seen those outfits. It's like a whole new level of style.
Hmm.
But how do brands navigate all these different cultural influences? Like, how do they do it without appropriating or misrepresenting them? That seems like a really tricky thing to do.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. It is tricky. And it's something that Gen Z is particularly sensitive to. They're really quick to call out brands that are being disrespectful or inauthentic.
So how do brands get it right? How do they draw inspiration from other cultures in a way that's respectful and authentic?
I think it all comes down to collaboration and representation. Brands really need to work with designers and artisans from those cultures,
Mm.
involve them in the creative process, and make sure that they're being paid fairly. They also need to be mindful of the cultural significance of certain designs and just avoid using them in a way that could be offensive or disrespectful.
That makes sense. It's like you can't just take something from another culture and just put it on a t-shirt
Yeah,
without even understanding the meaning behind it.
exactly. It's about cultural exchange,
Yeah.
not cultural appropriation. It's about celebrating diversity and sharing different perspectives.
I love that. It seems like fashion is becoming more inclusive and more representative of the world we actually live in. But I'm also kind of curious about the other side of that. What about the challenges of globalization? How are brands navigating the complexities of this global marketplace?
Oh, that's a whole other deep dive. But, before we jump into the global landscape of fashion and all the challenges that come with it, let's talk about how all these trends and influences are impacting luxury brands specifically.
Okay, so we've talked about like a lot. Gen Z's impact, sustainability, even how brands are, going global. But you know what I'm really curious about? Like, how are luxury brands handling all of this? I mean, they're known for, exclusivity and these super high prices, which doesn't exactly scream Gen Z or sustainability, right?
It's a great question. And it's something that, a lot of luxury brands are really wrestling with right now. They're kind of facing this dilemma. On the one hand, you have this heritage and this incredible craftsmanship that really sets them apart. But on the other hand, they need to appeal to this younger generation that's, more value conscious and way more socially aware.
Right. Like, how do you convince someone to spend, thousands of dollars on a handbag
Yeah.
when they could just get a dupe for like a fraction of the price,
Um,
especially when they're also thinking about like climate change
hmm.
and, ethical labor practices?
It's a tough balancing act, no doubt. But I think luxury brands have a few things going for them. First, they have that brand recognition and that legacy. There's a certain cachet that comes with owning a luxury item.
Yeah, like that saying, you never really own a Patek Philippe, you merely look after it for the next generation.
Hmm.
But I don't know, is that enough to win over Gen Z? They seem way more into experiences and authenticity than just these like status symbols.
Yeah, and that's where things get really interesting. Luxury brands are starting to realize that they need to offer more than just a product, right? They need to create a lifestyle,
Hmm.
an experience, a sense of belonging. And they're doing this through exclusive events or collaborations with artists and designers, even virtual experiences.
Oh, that reminds me of something we were talking about earlier, the metaverse. I read somewhere that luxury brands are already making virtual fashion and accessories, like avatars. Is that part of this whole experience thing?
Absolutely. The metaverse is like this whole new frontier for luxury brands. It lets them connect with this, younger, more tech-savvy audience
Hmm.
in a way that's engaging and interactive. And it also opens up all these new possibilities for creativity and innovation.
So instead of buying a physical handbag,
Yeah.
you could buy like a virtual one for your avatar in the metaverse.
Yeah.
That's wild. But does that mean that's like the end of physical fashion?
I don't think so. I think physical and virtual fashion are gonna like coexist. I mean, there's nothing quite like, you know,
Hmm.
wearing a beautiful garment or holding a luxurious handbag. But the lines are definitely starting to blur.
For sure. Okay, so we've talked about the challenges and opportunities for these luxury brands. But what about like the rest of the fashion industry? What are some of the biggest trends that are going to shape fashion in 2025 and beyond?
Well, we've already touched on a few, right? Sustainability, technology, Gen Z's influence. But I think one of the most important trends is this rise of personalization.
Mhm.
Consumers want these like more customized experiences. Everything from personalized style recommendations to like made to measure clothing.
Right. We talked about how AI is making like personalized styling more accessible, but what about actually producing the clothes? Is it even possible to like mass produce personalized items?
Yeah, and that's where things get really exciting. There are already companies out there using like 3D printing and other technologies to make custom fit clothing on demand. I mean, it's still early days, but I think we're going to see way more of this in the future.
Whoa, so you're saying that one day we might be able to like download a design
Hmm.
and just print our own clothes at home. That's crazy.
It's not impossible, but even if we don't all become, home-based fashion designers, I think technology is going to play a huge role in making fashion more sustainable and more accessible and more personalized.
It's like we're on the verge of a fashion revolution. It's exciting and a little bit scary at the same time. But one thing's for sure, it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Absolutely. And that's what I love about fashion. It's always evolving. It reflects our changing world, our values, our aspirations. Who knows what the future holds? But one thing's for sure, it's going to be stylish.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive. I hope you guys enjoyed exploring the future of fashion with us.
It's been a pleasure. And remember, the future of fashion is in your hands. Choose wisely, shop consciously, and express yourselves fearlessly.